There are races, and then there's the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Director James Mangold's new film, Ford vs. Ferrari, tells the story of the competition in the mid-1960s. An American manufacturing titan, Ford took on Italy's Ferrari, the reigning champion of Le Mans. Despite its size, Ford wasn't exactly a racing powerhouse, with a brand that brought to mind family road trips more than French endurance racing. To stand a chance in the 24-hour circuit, the American corporation brought on two racing legends, Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, and Ken Miles, played by Christian Bale, to help them take the European title. Here's the true story behind the Ford vs. Ferrari movie.
The man, Carroll Shelby, engineer, race driver. The car, the Shelby Mustang GT.
To build my kind of car, I had to take an existing car and modify it. I could have chosen any set of wheels I wanted. I picked Mustang.
If your goal were to, say, unseat an Italian racing giant, there would be few people better suited to task than Carroll Shelby, a World War II flight instructor turned chicken farmer, turned race car driver, turned builder of legendary automobiles.
Only Mustang makes it happen. These aren't just words, it's a fact.
Shelby was a larger-than-life figure in the world of fast cars through the second half of 20th century. He was known for his enormous personal magnetism as man of big ideas without much patience for detail. Shelby didn't start out building cars, he raced them and won. When he was still a farmer, he joined his first races in the early 1950s, winning competitions in the American Southwest. In 1954, he began racing for the Aston Martin team, eventually claiming victory at Le Mans for the British carmaker with co-driver Roy Salvadori. Heart troubles eventually forced Shelby to quit competitive racing. He decided that rather than driving fast cars, he would build them. In 1962, he founded Shelby American, an independent sports car manufacturer which began importing English AC coupes and retrofitting them with powerful Ford engines, dubbing the new creation the Shelby Cobra. By 1965, Shelby and his team were working on Ford's new racer, the GT40, which would go on to capture the famous Le Mans title from Ferrari, a performance juggernaut that had won the famous race for 6 years running. Ken Miles, played by Christian Bale, the other half of Ford vs. Ferrari's motorsport combination, was an English race car driver who became the winning man for an American automobile giant. Born in 1918 in Sutton Coldfield, England, Miles became an apprentice at an engine manufacturing company as a teenager before joining the British Army at the start of World War II, eventually participating in the 1944 D-Day landing. Miles began racing after the war, eventually racking up an impressive winning record. He joined Shelby's team not only to race cars, but also helping to engineering them. He began racing Ford's new GT40 cars, winning the 1966 Daytona 24 Hours race among a collection of other top spots. In Le Mans that year, Miles led in a Ford GT40 Mk2 at the end of the race, with two other GT40s following. But in order to engineer a photo finish, Miles allowed the second two Fords to catch up so that they could cross the finish line together. It was a powerful bit of PR for the car manufacturer, but it also cost Miles his victory. The Fords finished in a dead heat, and the Le Mans timekeepers determined that the second GT40 behind Miles had actually started the race from farther back, and therefore won the first place. Le Mans 1966 would be Miles's final race. Later that year, the driver died testing a new experimental Ford in California after the vehicle flipped at 150 miles per hour. As depicted in the Ford vs. Ferrari, Ford had actually been interested in purchasing Ferrari. When Ferrari declined the sale at the last minute, Henry Ford II decided he would have his revenge by taking the Italians' most prized racing title. But after Ford Advanced Vehicles failed to win in 1964, Ford brought on Carroll Shelby, who eventually captured the Le Mans win for the American motor magnate. Racing prospects took a dive in the 1970s, and Shelby, an avid entrepreneur, pursued other ventures, including safari expeditions, chili manufacturing, and land development. He also worked with automakers on specialized projects, including collaboration with Chrysler. Facing continued heart problems throughout his life, Shelby underwent a heart transplant in 1990. an experience that led him to found a nonprofit committed to raising money for children in need of heart surgery. He died in Dallas in 2012 at 89 years old.
A lot of people don't really know that Carroll's entry into Ford Motor Company came through Ford Racing.
Iacocca called me in 1964, right after the Mustang came out, and says, we want to make a race car out of this. I says, the thing is a secretary's car. I don't think it can be done.
Carroll was legendary in saying, hey, you can't make a racehorse out of a mule.
I mean, let's face it, Iacocca wanted to have a performance reputation for Ford.
Says, let's take the V8 and hop it up to 315, 20 horsepower. Let's change the brakes. Let's change the suspension. Let's take the rear seats out. And let's turn it into a sport car.
A car makes a name doesn't make a car. They were arguing over what to call the car. And so he calls the shop foreman out, and this is in Van Nuys, right out along the airport property. And he calls the shop foreman out, and he goes, count out the steps from here, from the corner of the building to the airport. So the guy walks out and counts 347 steps. He goes, we're gonna call this the GT350. That's how the name of the car came up. He's like, a car is gonna make the name. A name doesn't make the car.
I was proud of the hot rodders that put it together, because we did take something that was a secretary's car and turn it into something that's remembered 45 years later as a performance car rather than a secretary's car.
You know, and literally hanging parts in there, climbing into under the bay of the hood of the car and bolting the parts on, the suspension, the A-frame pieces. You know, hey, if you're going to make a car go 160 miles an hour, you damn well better make it be able to stop.
Carroll was a stickler for what the name Shelby meant. So he didn't want the bean counters coming in and telling them, well, those brakes are expensive, we can use these cheaper brakes. Or those tires are expensive, or that engine is expensive. And Ford knew it was expensive, so he was a stickler.
It's not just a license agreement, like, put your badge on there. I mean, literally, the time he spent in those cars is important for every engineer for the products from now going into the future, because they know what he wanted.
Fans expect certain things with certain names, like Cobra, like Shelby, Mach 1. Things have to deliver. So Ford's now in the business of delivering those promises and living up to those legacies of names like Carroll Shelby.